the gates of time open, the modern world dissolves, and something ancient, something immense, rises from the golden dust of a river plain. The air itself feels heavier here, thick with the memory of kings and conquerors, of priests chanting in torchlit sanctuaries, of scribes pressing reed styluses into soft clay. Before us, stretching toward a flat and endless horizon, the great walls of Babylon emerge, 18 kilometers of mud brick and bitumen mortar encircling a city of 200,000 souls. The Ishtar Gate blazes in cobalt, blue, and gold, its glazed bricks alive with striding lions and coiled dragons. Beyond it, the processional way unfolds like a corridor through time itself, leading toward the ziggurat Etemenanki, the house of the foundation of heaven and earth, rising in 7 terraced tiers toward the Mesopotamian sky. This is Babylon, the gate of the gods, and its story is the story of civilization itself. What begins here is not a glimpse or a fragment. This is a complete journey, spanning more than 6,000 years, from the earliest reed hut villages of the Ubad period along the marshlands of southern Mesopotamia, through the birth of writing at Uruk around 3,400 years before the Common Era, through the conquests of Sargon of Akkad and the great ziggurat builders of Ur, all the way to the moment when Cyrus of Persia walked through these very gates in 539 before the Common Era, and beyond to the slow silence that finally claimed these streets. We will witness Hammurabi rise from the throne of a minor kingdom to forge an empire, inscribing 282 laws onto a pillar of black diorite that still echoes in courtrooms today. We will walk the canals where farmers tended barley fields and date orchards, where merchants weighed silver on stone duck weights and sealed contracts in wet clay. We will stand in the scribal schools where students labored for years to master cuneiform, where mathematicians understood the theorem attributed to Pythagoras a full 1,000 years before he was born, where astronomers tracked the cycles of Venus with a precision unmatched for a millennium. We will read the words of the Epic of Gilgamesh, humanity's oldest surviving literary masterpiece, and hear the creation hymn of the Enuma Elish that shaped how cultures across the ancient world understood their origins. And we will witness the fall, the Elamite armies looting Hammurabi's stele and carrying it to Susa, the Assyrian king Sennacherib destroying Babylon in a fury so terrible that his own son rebuilt it in shame, the brief, brilliant blaze of Nebuchadnezzar II, who burned Jerusalem's temple and brought its people to these river banks, and the final chapter, when the last king Nabonidus abandoned the gods of his city, and Persia claimed an empire that had forgotten how to defend itself. What you are about to see shaped the world we inhabit today. Every time you glance at a clock, you are reading Babylonian mathematics. Every 60-minute hour, every 360-degree circle, every sign of the zodiac carries the fingerprint of this civilization. The legal principles carved on that diorite stele informed the laws of Moses and the codes of Rome. The literary traditions born in these temple libraries traveled through Greek, Persian, and Arabic hands into the foundations of world literature. Babylon is not merely ancient history. It is the bedrock beneath modern civilization. If you find wonder in these complete journeys through the ancient world, please subscribe so you never miss our next exploration. Each week we bring you the full story of a lost world, told from its first breath to its final silence. Now let us begin our journey at the very beginning, where 2 great rivers meet the marshlands and the first villages rise from the reeds. The land is flat, flat beyond comprehension, flat beyond the reach of sight, a vast alluvial plain stretching from horizon to horizon under a sky so immense it seems to press the earth into submission. Two rivers carve through this emptiness. The Tigris runs swift and unpredictable to the east, fed by mountain snowmelt that sends it surging over its banks without warning. The Euphrates flows slower to the west, broader, more generous, depositing fine silt along its meandering course. Between them lies a territory that will one day be called Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. And it is here, in the waterlogged marshes and sun-scorched flats of southern Iraq, that the story of civilization begins. Around 6,500 years before the Common Era, the conditions are deceptively hostile. Summer temperatures climb past 120 degrees. Rainfall barely reaches 6 inches per year. The soil, where it exists, is a heavy clay laced with salt. No stone rises from this plain, no timber grows in abundance. And yet the rivers bring something more valuable than any mineral wealth: silt. Each spring flood deposits a fresh layer of extraordinarily fertile sediment, rich in organic nutrients carried from the highlands of eastern Anatolia. The land does not give freely, but it rewards those who learn to manage water. Small communities of farmers begin to do exactly that. They dig shallow channels from the Euphrates into adjacent fields, guiding floodwater to nourish plots of emmer wheat and barley. These are not grand engineering projects, but modest ditches, scratched into soft earth with wooden tools, yet they represent a revolution. Irrigation transforms the calculus of survival. Fields that would yield nothing under natural rainfall now produce surplus grain. Surplus means storage. Storage means permanence. Permanence means villages. The culture that emerges across this landscape is known as the Ubaid, named for the small mound of Tel al-Ubaid, where its distinctive painted pottery was first identified. From roughly 5,500 to around 4,000 years before the Common Era, Ubaid settlements spread across southern Mesopotamia and beyond, reaching the coasts of the Persian Gulf and the plains of northern Syria. Their pottery, buff-colored vessels decorated with geometric patterns in dark brown paint, appears at dozens of sites, evidence of shared traditions across vast distances. At Eridu, near the edge of the southern marshes, something remarkable takes shape. A small mud-brick shrine, barely larger than a single room, rises on virgin soil around 5,400 years before the Common Era. It contains a niche for offerings and an altar table. This modest structure will be rebuilt again and again over the following millennia, each new temple erected directly atop the ruins of its predecessor, growing larger and more elaborate with every iteration. Archaeologists have identified at least 18 successive building levels at Eridu, a continuous sequence of sacred architecture spanning thousands of years. The Sumerian king list, composed much later, names Eridu as the place where kingship first descended from heaven. In the memory of Mesopotamia itself, this is where it all started. The Ubaid villages are clusters of reed huts and mud-brick houses arranged along canal banks. Families keep small herds of goats and sheep. Fishermen work the marshes with reed boats. Potters shape clay by hand, firing it in open kilns. The dead are buried beneath house floors, sometimes with painted vessels and simple ornaments of shell or stone placed beside them. There is no writing yet, no monumental art, no kings or armies. The world is still small, still quiet, still measured by the rhythm of planting and harvest, flood and recession. But the logic of irrigation is relentless. Channels must be maintained, extended, coordinated among neighboring fields. Disputes over water require resolution. Surplus grain demands administration. Slowly, invisibly, the organizational complexity of these communities deepens. By 4,000 years before the Common Era, the largest Ubaid settlements are growing into something no human society has produced before. Dense, permanent, socially stratified communities poised on the threshold of true urbanism. The mud and water of southern Mesopotamia have set in motion a process that nothing will stop. The threshold is crossed sometime after 4,000 before the Common Era, and the crossing is swift by the measure of deep time. Within a few centuries, the dense settlements of the southern plain undergo a transformation so radical that nothing before it compares. Villages do not simply grow larger. They become something categorically new. Cities, the first the world has ever known. Places where thousands of strangers live together under shared institutions, where labor is divided into dozens of specializations, where monumental architecture reshapes the skyline and the human imagination simultaneously. Uruk is the greatest of them. Situated along an ancient channel of the Euphrates in what is now southern Iraq, Uruk expands with astonishing speed. By 3100 before the Common Era, its mud brick walls enclose an area of roughly 250 hectares, sheltering a population that may reach 40,000 souls, a number unmatched anywhere on Earth. The scale is staggering. No settlement in Egypt, no community in the Indus Valley, no village in China approaches this concentration of humanity for centuries to come. The city's sacred heart is the Eanna precinct, a vast temple complex dedicated to Inanna, goddess of love and war. Its buildings rise in mud brick splendor, their facades decorated with thousands of small clay cones pressed into wet plaster, red, white, black, forming geometric mosaics of hypnotic intricacy. Nearby, atop a stepped platform that anticipates the great ziggurats of later millennia, stands the White Temple, its walls coated in brilliant gypsum plaster that catches the Mesopotamian sun like a beacon visible for kilometers across the flat plain. These are not merely places of worship. They are administrative centers, storehouses, redistribution hubs, where the surplus of an irrigated agricultural hinterland is collected, recorded, and allocated. It is the recording that changes everything. Around 3400 before the Common Era, temple administrators at Uruk begin pressing the cut end of a reed stylus into small cushions of wet clay, creating wedge-shaped marks, cuneiform, from the Latin cunus, meaning wedge. The earliest tablets are not literature, not prayer, not poetry. They are lists of barley rations, lists of livestock, lists of laborers, accounting pure and simple, born from the need to track surplus in a society too complex for memory alone. These modest clay rectangles, small enough to fit in a palm, represent the invention of writing, arguably the single most consequential technology in human history. Alongside writing emerges another innovation of profound importance, the cylinder seal. Carved from carnelian, limestone, or lapis lazuli, these small stone cylinders bear intricate scenes, ritual banquets, animal combats, divine figures that when rolled across wet clay produce a continuous frieze. Each seal is unique, a personal signature in a world where individual identity is beginning to matter within the anonymous mass of urban life. Uruk's influence radiates outward in what scholars call the Uruk expansion. Colonies and trading outposts carrying Uruk-style pottery, architecture, and administrative practices appear across Upper Mesopotamia, into southeastern Anatolia, and along the Iranian plateau. Habuba Kabira on the Middle Euphrates replicates Uruk's urban plan almost exactly. This is not military conquest, but cultural diffusion on a scale the world has never witnessed. The Sumerian king list, compiled centuries later, remembers this era through legendary names. Enmerkar, lord of Uruk, who is said to have traded with distant Aratta. Lugalbanda the shepherd, wanderer of mountain passes. And Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, builder of its mighty walls, whose story will echo through 3,000 years of literary tradition. Whether these figures are historical, mythological, or something between, their attachment to Uruk testifies to the city's primacy in Mesopotamian memory. By 2900 before the Common Era, Uruk is no longer alone. Eridu, Lagash, Nippur, Kish, a constellation of city-states dots the southern plain, each with its patron deity, its temple economy, its mud-brick ramparts. The age of isolated villages is irrevocably over. Humanity has invented the city, invented writing, invented bureaucracy, and in doing so has crossed into a world where history itself becomes possible, recorded, preserved, and transmitted across generations on tablets of river clay. The constellation of city-states that now illuminates the southern plain is not a peaceful one. From roughly 2900 before the Common Era onward, these cities wage war upon one another with increasing ferocity, fighting irrigation irrigation water, arable land, and the prestige of regional supremacy. Lagash and Umma clash repeatedly over a fertile border district called Gwedana, their conflict documented on stone monuments spanning generations. Kish, in the north of the alluvial plain, claims a hegemony so prestigious that later kings from distant cities adopt the title King of Kish as a mark of universal authority. Uruk, Nippur, each rises and falls in cycles of dominance, their armies of spearmen marching in tight phalanx formation depicted on carved plaques of shell and limestone inlaid in bitumen. Beneath the soil of in a cemetery dating to roughly 2500 before the Common Era, the dead reveal the staggering wealth these wars produce. Gold headdresses of hammered leaf and lapis lazuli beads adorn the skulls of royal women. A magnificent lyre rests against a tomb wall, its sounding box crowned with a golden bull's head, eyes of shell and lapis staring into eternity. Dozens of attendants lie in ordered rows beside their rulers, having followed them into death, a practice of human sacrifice that vanishes from Mesopotamia after this period, but testifies to the absolute power these early dynastic kings command. Then, around 2334 before the Common Era, a figure emerges who shatters the entire system of competing city-states. Sargon of Akkad rises from obscure origins. Later legend claims he was a foundling set adrift in a reed basket on the Euphrates to establish the first empire in recorded history. Speaking Akkadian, a Semitic language distinct from Sumerian, Sargon conquers city after city. Uruk falls, falls, Lagash, Umma, the entire southern plain submits. His armies press northwest to the cedar forests of Lebanon and the shores of the Mediterranean. From the Persian Gulf to the upper Euphrates, a single political authority governs for the first time. His grandson Naram-Sin pushes further, declaring himself a living god, the first Mesopotamian king to claim divinity during his own lifetime. A victory stele carved in pink sandstone shows him ascending a mountain, horned helmet upon his head, trampling enemies beneath his feet, while stars shine above in divine approval. Yet the Akkadian Empire proves brittle. Within a generation of Naram Sin's death, it fractures under pressure from internal revolt and incursions by the Gutians, a highland people from the Zagros Mountains who dominate lower Mesopotamia for perhaps a century. Recovery comes from the south. Around 2112 before the Common Era, Ur-Nammu, governor of Ur, expels the Gutians and founds what scholars call the Third Dynasty of Ur. His ambition is monumental in every sense. At Ur, a massive ziggurat rises from the flat plain, 3 solid terraces of mud brick, the lowest measuring 62 meters by 43, faced with kiln-fired bricks set in bitumen mortar, its corners oriented to the cardinal directions. This structure, partially standing to this day, serves as the elevated platform for the Temple of the Moon, god Nana, patron deity of Ur. Ur-Nammu's legacy extends beyond architecture. He composes a law code. Fragmentary tablets preserve its provisions that predates Hammurabi's famous laws by approximately 3 centuries. Its preamble speaks of establishing justice, protecting the orphan and the widow, and its clauses prescribe monetary fines rather than physical mutilation, revealing a legal philosophy of remarkable sophistication. Under Ur-Nammu and his son Shulgi, the Third Dynasty of Ur constructs an administrative apparatus of breathtaking precision. Tens of thousands of cuneiform tablets record every transaction: grain deliveries, livestock counts, labor assignments, temple offerings, in a bureaucratic system so thorough that modern scholars can reconstruct monthly economic activity across entire provinces. Shulgi standardizes weights, measures, and the calendar itself. Yet this magnificent edifice collapses with startling speed. Pressure from Amorite semi-nomadic groups infiltrating from the west and a devastating Elamite invasion from the east bring the dynasty to its end around 2004 before the Common Era. The last king, Ibi-Sin, is carried off to Elam in chains. The great ziggurat stands silent over a broken kingdom, and into the resulting power vacuum, new peoples and new ambitions begin to stir. The vacuum left by Ibi-Sin's capture does not remain empty for long. Across the shattered landscape of southern Mesopotamia, 2 cities move swiftly to claim the inheritance of Ur. Ishbi-Erra, once a governor under the fallen dynasty, has already established an independent kingdom at Izin, seizing control of Nippur and its ancient religious prestige. To the south, Larsa rises under its own ambitious rulers. These 2 powers will contest supremacy over the alluvial plain for nearly 2 centuries, their rivalry defining an era scholars call the Isin-Larsa period. But the political map is far more fractured than a simple duality suggests. Eshnunna commands the Diyala River Valley to the northeast. Mari dominates the middle Euphrates far to the northwest, controlling trade routes linking Mesopotamia to Syria and the Mediterranean coast. Kish, Sippar, Kazalu, smaller kingdoms jostle for territory along the braided waterways. It is an age of chronic fragmentation, of shifting alliances and seasonal campaigns, of kings whose domains sometimes extend no further than a day's march from their own walls. Threading through this broken world are the Amorites. These Western Semitic-speaking semi-nomadic peoples have been filtering into Mesopotamia for generations, their presence noted with anxiety in Ur-III administrative texts long before the dynasty's collapse. They herd sheep and goats along the margins of cultivated land, move with the seasons, speak a language distinct from the Akkadian of the cities. The kings of had built a wall, the Murik Tidnim, the repeller of the Tidnum, to hold them back. It failed. Now, in the aftermath of imperial collapse, Amorite chieftains do not merely settle among the urban population. They seize thrones. Within a few generations, nearly every significant kingdom in Mesopotamia is ruled by a dynasty of Amorite origin. Among the least remarkable of these new foundations is a small settlement on the eastern bank of the Euphrates, roughly midway between Kish to the north and Nippur to the south. Its name in Akkadian is Bab Ilim, the Gate of the Gods. It possesses no great temple tradition, no ancient claim to kingship, no mention in the earliest Sumerian chronicles of primordial sovereignty. Around 1894, before the Common Era, an Amorite leader named Sumuabum establishes an independent dynasty here. The first dynasty of Babylon begins not with conquest or revelation, but with the quiet construction of a city wall. Sumuabum and his successors, Sumulael, Sabium, Apil-Sin, Sin-Mubalit, govern for over a century with patient, methodical ambition. They dig canals to extend irrigated farmland. They raise mud-brick fortifications, modest but functional, their sun-dried bricks bonded with bitumen against the seasonal floods. They build temples to Marduk, the city's patron deity, a god of no particular cosmic rank in this era, merely one among dozens in the Mesopotamian pantheon. The early skyline of Babylon is humble. Low walls, a small ziggurat platform, clusters of flat-roofed courtyard houses, date palms lining the canal banks. Yet geography favors the city. Babylon sits at the narrowest point between the Tigris and Euphrates, astride trade routes running north to Assyria and south to the Persian Gulf. Grain barges pass its quays. Caravans pause within its walls. Revenue accumulates. Territory expands incrementally. A neighboring town absorbed here, a canal system secured there. Each king leaves the kingdom slightly larger, slightly more fortified, slightly more connected to the commercial networks that sustain urban life on the plain. By the reign of Sin-Mubalit, Babylon controls a meaningful corridor of land along the Euphrates. It is still dwarfed by Larsa under Rim-Sin to the south, and by the great powers at Eshnunna and Mari, but the foundations are laid. Walls, canals, temples, a dynasty now 5 generations deep with legitimate claim to rule. When Sin-Mubalit's son ascends the throne around 1792 before the Common Era, he inherits a kingdom small enough to be overlooked by its rivals. His name is Hammurabi, and none of the great kings who surround him yet understand what this modest city and its young ruler are about to become. Hammurabi inherits a kingdom that occupies perhaps 50 kilometers of river frontage along the Euphrates, hemmed in by powers that have ruled for generations. Rim-Sin of Larsa commands the entire south, his reign already decades old, his authority stretching from the Persian Gulf marshes to the outskirts of Nippur. To the east, Eshnunna controls the Diyala River Valley and its lucrative trade routes to the Iranian plateau. To the northwest, Zimri-Lim presides over Mari, a city whose palace contains nearly 300 rooms and whose archives will one day reveal the intricate web of diplomacy that defines this age. Babylon, by comparison, is a secondary state, and its young king knows it. The first years are spent not in conquest, but in consolidation. Hammurabi strengthens canal systems, repairs city walls, dedicates temples. The Mari correspondence preserves a remarkable portrait of a ruler who personally oversees the allocation of irrigation water, adjudicates disputes between farmers, and monitors grain shipments with obsessive precision. He builds alliances carefully, sending diplomatic gifts and military contingents to support neighbors when it serves his interests. For nearly 3 decades, Babylon grows stronger while its rivals exhaust themselves in shifting coalitions and border wars. The decisive turn comes in the 30th year of his reign. Elam, the ancient power east of the Tigris, launches an invasion that destabilizes the entire region. Hammurabi rallies a coalition, defeats the Elamite forces, and in the aftermath turns on his weakened neighbors with stunning speed. Lhasa falls in 1763 before the Common Era after a campaign in which Hammurabi diverts water supplies to force submission. Rim-Sin, who has ruled for 60 years, is captured. Within 2 years, Eshnunna is conquered. Then Hammurabi's attention shifts to Mari, once his closest ally. Around 1761, Babylonian armies march northwest along the Euphrates, and Mari's magnificent palace is put to the torch. The destruction is deliberate and thorough, a message to any city that might resist. By the final decade of his reign, Hammurabi controls all of southern and central Mesopotamia from the Persian Gulf to the Middle Euphrates. Babylon is no longer a minor kingdom, but the capital of an empire. The transformation is commemorated in the most enduring artifact of his reign, a stele of polished black diorite standing more than 2 meters tall, its upper register carved with a relief showing the king receiving authority from Shamash, god of justice. Below, in 49 columns of cuneiform, 282 provisions establish a comprehensive legal framework governing property, commerce, family, labor, and criminal punishment. Builders whose structures collapse and kill the occupant face death. Physicians who blind a patient through malpractice lose their hands. Wives may initiate divorce. Merchants must honor contracts or face penalties calculated to the shekel. This is not the world's first law code. Ur-Nammu's preceded it by 3 centuries. But it is the most comprehensive, the most systematically organized, and the most deliberately public. Copies are erected in temples across the empire so that any citizen may read the king's justice. Alongside the legal revolution, a theological one unfolds. Marduk, the city god of Babylon, is elevated above the ancient deities of Sumer and Akkad. The Esagila temple complex expands. Priests compose hymns declaring Marduk supreme among the gods, his authority mirroring his earthly patron's dominion over rival cities. Political unification and religious centralization advance together, each reinforcing the other. Hammurabi dies around 1750 before the Common Era, having reigned for 42 years. The empire he leaves behind is vast but fragile, held together by the force of a single extraordinary will. The canals he dug still carry water. The laws he carved still stand in temple courtyards. The god he elevated still reigns in the Esagila. But the alliances are personal, the loyalties conditional, and the southern cities remember their independence. The question that hangs over the flat, shimmering plain is whether any successor can hold what Hammurabi has built. The stele stands 2¼ meters tall, a pillar of polished black diorite hauled from distant quarries in the land of Magan. Its surface is cool to the touch, dense as basalt, resistant to the erosion that devours mud brick within generations. At its crown, a relief carved in shallow depth shows a seated figure extending a rod and ring, the god Shamash, Lord of Justice and the Sun, toward a standing king who receives these symbols of authority with both hands. Below this image, 49 columns of cuneiform script descend in tight, elegant rows, each wedge-shaped impression pressed with exacting care into the stone. 282 provisions govern the life of an empire. The prologue speaks first. It declares that the gods Anu and Enlil have appointed Marduk to supremacy over all peoples and have chosen Hammurabi to make justice prevail in the land, to destroy the wicked, and to prevent the strong from oppressing the weak. This is not merely legislation. It is theology rendered into governance, divine will made operational through specific statutes addressing the granular realities of Babylonian existence. Old Babylonian society divides into 3 recognized classes. The Awelam stands at the summit, a free citizen of full legal standing whose injuries demand the highest compensation. The Mushkenum occupies a middle position, a dependent of the palace whose rights are real, but whose penalties and compensations differ in scale. The wardom, the enslaved person, exists as property, yet retains certain protections. A slave may conduct business, own possessions, and purchase freedom under specific circumstances. The code does not invent these distinctions. It codifies what custom has already established, freezing social architecture into permanent legal form. Property law occupies enormous space within the provisions. Irrigation is life on this plane, and the code addresses it with corresponding gravity. Law 53 holds a man liable if he neglects his canal bank and allows floodwater to destroy a neighbor's crop. He must compensate the lost grain. Law 55 extends liability further. If water sweeps across multiple fields, the negligent farmer must pay for every ruined harvest. Agricultural disputes that once festered into blood feuds now find resolution through measured restitution. Marriage contracts receive meticulous attention. A union without a written agreement holds no legal force. Dowries must be returned if a husband divorces without cause. A woman whose husband is captured in war may enter another household if no grain remains to sustain her, yet she must return to the first husband if he comes home. Inheritance provisions protect children of both primary and secondary wives. The code does not idealize family life. It manages its fractures with unsentimental precision. Commerce thrives under regulatory clarity. Merchant partnerships require written contracts specifying investments and profit divisions. Tavern keepers who overcharge or who allow conspirators to meet without reporting them face death. Builders bear lethal responsibility for their craft. Law 229 decrees that if a house collapses and kills the owner, the builder shall be put to death. Medical practitioners face similar stakes. A surgeon whose bronze lancet causes a patient's death loses his hand. The principle of proportional retaliation runs through the criminal provisions like a copper thread. Law 196 establishes the formula that will echo through millennia. If a man destroys the eye of another free man, his own eye shall be destroyed. Yet this symmetry applies only among equals. Injury to a mushkenum demands silver compensation instead. Injury to a slave requires payment to the owner. Justice in Babylon is calibrated to status, not to abstract equality. The epilogue seals everything with curses of extraordinary violence. Any future king who alters these words, erases the carved name, or substitutes his own shall suffer the wrath of every deity in the pantheon. Enlil shall decree the destruction of his city. Ishtar shall shatter his warriors in battle. Ea shall dam the rivers and starve his people. The curses stretch across dozens of lines, longer than many of the laws themselves, a wall of divine threat protecting the text from revision. Hammurabi's code is not the first. Ur-Nammu's laws predate it by 3 centuries. The laws of Lipit Ishtar and the laws of Eshnunna precede it by decades. But none achieves this scope, this systematic ambition to regulate an entire civilization from irrigation ditch to surgical table. The diorite stele will stand in the Esagila temple complex for centuries, copied by scribes onto clay tablets distributed across the empire's cities, studied in scribal schools long after the dynasty that created it has crumbled into dust, and the plain has swallowed its palaces whole. The laws carved into that diorite pillar draw their authority not merely from a king, but from a god. At the stele's crown, Hammurabi stands before a seated figure radiating divine power, Shamash, god of justice and the sun, extending the rod and ring of sovereignty. Yet it is not Shamash who reigns supreme in Babylon's theological order. That distinction belongs to a deity whose ascent mirrors the city's own improbable rise. Marduk, patron god of Babylon, once an obscure figure in the crowded Mesopotamian pantheon, now elevated to a position no city god has held before. The transformation unfolds across the span of the First Dynasty. When the Amorite founders established their rule around 1894 before the Common Era, Marduk is a minor agricultural deity associated with water and vegetation, subordinate to the ancient powers, Enlil of Nippur, Enki of Eridu, Anu of Uruk. The great hymns do not yet celebrate him. The theological lists rank him among lesser sons of Ea. But as Babylon's political dominion expands under Hammurabi, so does Marduk's cosmic stature. The king's prologue to his law code already names Marduk as the god whom Anu and Enlil have appointed to shepherd humanity. This is a revolutionary claim. The elder gods voluntarily cede supremacy to a younger one, just as older cities yield to Babylon. The Esagila temple complex stands at the heart of this theological revolution. Its mud brick walls enclose courtyards where priests in white linen garments perform daily rituals of washing, clothing, and feeding Marduk's cult statue, a figure adorned with gold and precious stones, seated in an inner sanctuary lit by the flicker of sesame oil lamps. The statue is not a symbol. In Babylonian theology, the deity inhabits the image after the sacred mouth-washing ceremony. The Mispai ritual transforms carved wood and metal into living divine presence. Around the Esagila, a vast temple economy operates with bureaucratic precision. Priests, priestesses, and temple administrators manage agricultural estates spanning thousands of hectares along canal networks. Barley, dates, and sesame flow into temple storehouses. Livestock herds graze on temple lands. The institution functions as landlord, employer, and bank, issuing loans of silver and grain. The Entu priestess, a woman of elite birth consecrated to the god, holds a position of extraordinary prestige, managing property and participating in rituals that bind the divine to the earthly order. Divination saturates every level of decision-making. Before military campaigns, treaty negotiations, or construction projects, the Baru, the divination priest, slaughters a sheep and examines its liver with meticulous care. Terracotta liver models, their surfaces divided into zones and inscribed with omens, serve as reference guides. A discolored lobe, an unusual fold, a mark on the gallbladder, each feature carries meaning transmitted through generations of accumulated observation. The practice is not superstition by Babylonian understanding. It is a technology for reading divine intention encoded in the fabric of the natural world. The Akitu festival, celebrated at the spring equinox, crystallizes Marduk's supremacy in public spectacle. Over 11 days, the god's statue processes from the Esagila through the streets of Babylon to the Akitu house beyond the city walls. The king's legitimacy is ritually renewed. The Enuma Elish, the creation epic that later scribes will compile into its canonical form, finds its theological roots in this period's insistence that Marduk alone defeated the primordial chaos dragon Tiamat and fashioned the cosmos from her body. The 50 names bestowed upon Marduk in that text absorb the powers of every older deity into a single supreme figure. This theological architecture serves political ends with elegant efficiency. A king who rules by Marduk's mandate rules by the mandate of the universe's creator. A city whose god commands all other gods commands all other cities. The priesthood that maintains Marduk's cult becomes indispensable to royal power, and royal power becomes indispensable to the priesthood. The bond between temple and palace, forged in the old Babylonian period, will prove so durable that even foreign conquerors, Kassites, Assyrians, Persians, will find it necessary to seek Marduk's blessing before claiming Babylon's throne. The god outlasts every dynasty that serves him. But the god's endurance does not guarantee the empire's survival. Hammurabi dies around 1750 before the Common Era, and the realm he spent 4 decades assembling begins to fracture almost immediately. His son Samsu-iluna inherits the throne and the illusion of unity, yet within his first years the southern cities erupt in coordinated revolt. Rim-Sin II, bearing the name of Larsa's defeated king, rallies the old Sumerian heartland against Babylonian control. Samsu-iluna crushes the rebellion with brutal efficiency, but the victory is hollow. Archaeological surveys reveal that he destroys the walls of Ur, Uruk, and Larsa so thoroughly that these ancient cities never fully recover their former populations. The canals that sustained them silt up or are deliberately breached. The deep south becomes a depopulated wasteland. Into that vacuum moves a dynasty that Babylonian scribes call the Sealand. Established in the marshes of the far south near the Persian Gulf, this breakaway kingdom seizes control of the old Sumerian cities and holds them for nearly 3 centuries. Babylon's empire, which once stretched from Mari to the Gulf, contracts to a modest territory around the capital itself. Samsu-iluna's successors, Abi-eshu, Ammi-ditana, Ammi-saduqa, Samsu-ditana, rule a diminishing state for 150 years, each reign smaller in ambition than the last. The final blow arrives from an entirely unexpected direction. Around 1595 before the Common Era, Mursili I, the young Hittite king, leads his army on an extraordinary long-range raid from Anatolia down the Euphrates corridor. Hittite chariots, light, fast, spoke-wheeled, thunder across the plains. Babylon falls. The Hittites plunder the temples and carry off the statue of Marduk and the statue of his consort Sarpanaitum. The pedestal in the Esagila stands empty. For a civilization that believes its god literally inhabits his image, this is not mere theft. It is cosmic catastrophe. The divine presence has been ripped from the city. Mursili does not stay. The Hittites withdraw northward, and Babylon lies stunned, leaderless, its first dynasty extinguished. The power vacuum persists for years, perhaps decades. The chronology remains debated, until a people called the Kassites fill it. Their origins are obscure. Babylonian texts call them Kashshu. They speak a language unrelated to any known family. They appear in Babylonian records as early as the reign of Samsu-iluna, initially as laborers and mercenaries filtering down from the Zagros highlands. Now they claim the throne. The Kassite king Agum II, ruling perhaps a generation after the Hittite sack, accomplishes what no Babylonian ruler could. He recovers the stolen statue of Marduk. The circumstances remain unclear, possibly through negotiation or military pressure, and restores it to the Esagila with elaborate ceremony. The inscription commemorating this act emphasizes lavish new garments and jeweled adornments for the divine image. The gesture is deliberate and shrewd. By returning Marduk to his home, a foreign dynasty legitimizes itself as Babylon's rightful guardian. The Kassites rename the land Karanduniash and settle into a reign that will last over 400 years, the longest single dynasty in Babylonian history. They do not impose their own culture. Instead, they absorb Babylonian traditions with remarkable thoroughness, adopting cuneiform script, worshipping Mesopotamian gods alongside their own deities Shukamuna and Shumalia, and maintaining the temple economies that have sustained urban life for millennia. Their distinctive contribution survives in the Kuduru stones, polished boundary markers carved with divine symbols, the crescent of Sin, the eight-pointed star of Ishtar, the horned crown of Anu, serpents and scorpions marking celestial powers. These stones record royal land grants with elaborate curses against anyone who moves them, and they represent a new form of legal monument unique to Kassite administration. Mud brick walls rise again. Temples are restored. The scribal schools resume their patient work of copying literary texts onto fresh clay. Babylon under the Kassites is no longer a conquering empire, but it is something perhaps more enduring, a cultural capital whose prestige transcends political power, a city whose god and whose learning command respect even from those who once sacked its gates. That cultural capital now enters an age when the known world shrinks, when great kings address one another as brothers, and when the language of Babylonian scribes becomes the diplomatic tongue of an entire international order stretching from the Nile to the Zagros Mountains. By the 14th century before the Common Era, the Kassite dynasty has ruled Babylon for over 200 years. The kingdom they govern is no longer called Babylon alone. In diplomatic correspondence, it bears the Kassite name Karanduniash, and its rulers sit as equals at a table shared with the pharaohs of Egypt, the emperors of Hatti, the kings of Mitanni, and the rising power of Assyria. This is the late Bronze Age system, a web of alliance, marriage, and trade, binding the great powers of the ancient world into a fragile but remarkable equilibrium. The evidence for this world survives in an extraordinary archive discovered at Tel El Amarna in Egypt in 1887, nearly 400 clay tablets inscribed in Akkadian cuneiform, the lingua franca of international diplomacy. Among them are letters from the Kassite king Burnaburiash II, who reigns around 1350 before the Common Era. His correspondence with the Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten reveals a relationship of formal equality laced with sharp complaint. Burnaburiash protests that the gold sent from Egypt is insufficient, that when his messengers arrived at the Egyptian court they were kept waiting, that a previous shipment of gold, when melted down, yielded far less than promised. These are not the words of a vassal. They are the grievances of a peer who expects reciprocity. Diplomatic marriages seal these alliances. Kassite princesses travel to Egypt. Egyptian gold flows to Babylon. Lapis lazuli from the mines of Badakhshan in distant Afghanistan passes through Babylonian hands westward. Horses bred on Kassite estates move toward Hatti and Egypt. Chariots, the supreme military technology of the age, roll from workshops where Kassite craftsmen bend imported wood and bronze into instruments of war and prestige. At home, the Kassite kings undertake monumental construction. Kurigalzu I, or perhaps the second, the sources remain debated, builds an entirely new royal capital at Dur Kurigalzu, modern Akka Kuf, west of present-day Baghdad. Its ziggurat core, constructed of mud brick reinforced with reed matting laid at regular intervals, still rises 57 meters above the Iraqi plain, one of the most imposing ancient structures surviving in Mesopotamia. The city around it contains palaces, temples, and administrative buildings decorated with painted murals and molded brick facades. Yet the Kassite contribution extends beyond stone and brick. Under their patronage, Babylonian scribes undertake a vast project of literary standardization. The great texts of Mesopotamian tradition, hymns, omens, mathematical tables, astronomical observations, medical compendiums, and above all the epic literature, are collected, edited, and organized into canonical series. The scribal curriculum crystallizes into a fixed sequence of texts that students will copy for centuries. This is the era when the Babylonian literary canon takes its enduring shape, ensuring that knowledge accumulated over a millennium will survive the dynasty itself. The temples of Babylon are rebuilt and enriched. The Esagila complex dedicated to Marduk receives new endowments of agricultural land, and the priesthood administers estates that function as economic engines, collecting rents, managing herds, and distributing rations. Kuduru boundary stones multiply, their carved surfaces growing more elaborate, celestial symbols, divine emblems, and lengthy curse formulae protecting royal land grants from future contestation. This is a world of remarkable stability, but it rests on foundations that are already shifting. Assyria, once a minor partner in the Brotherhood of Kings, grows steadily more assertive under rulers like Ashur-uballit I, who intervenes directly in Kassite succession disputes. The Elamites to the east watch and wait. The international system that sustains Kassite Babylon depends on a balance of power that no single disruption can shatter, but that many simultaneous crises can destroy. The caravans still move. The scribes still press their reed style into wet clay. The ziggurat at Dur Kurigalzu still catches the last light of evening. But the Bronze Age world that made all of this possible is approaching its breaking point. The breaking point arrives not as a slow erosion, but as a catastrophe. Around 1158, before the Common Era, the Elamite king Shutruk-Nahunta leads his armies westward from Susa across the Tigris lowlands and falls upon a Babylonia already weakened by decades of Assyrian pressure and internal fragmentation. The Kassite king Zababa-Shuma-Idina offers resistance that collapses within months. Elamite soldiers pour through breached walls and into temple precincts that have stood inviolate for centuries. What follows is not mere conquest, but systematic plunder on a scale Mesopotamia has rarely witnessed. Shutruk-Nahunta and his son Kutir-Nahunta strip Babylonian cities of their most sacred and ancient treasures. The black diorite stele bearing Hammurabi's law code standing in Sippar's temple of Shamash for over 600 years, is pried from its foundation and loaded onto transport for the long journey east to Susa. The victory stele of Naram-Sin, already ancient beyond reckoning, follows it. Most devastating of all, the cult statue of Marduk is seized from the Esagila temple in Babylon itself, carried away from the sanctuary where priests have tended its rituals for generations. In Mesopotamian theology, the departure of a city's god signifies divine abandonment. Babylon without Marduk is a body without breath. The Kassite dynasty, which endured for over 4 centuries, ends in this conflagration. The last Kassite king, Enlil-nadin-Ahi, rules perhaps 3 years before Elamite forces remove him. The longest dynasty in Babylonian history dissolves, and the cities of the alluvial plain lie stripped of their holiest possessions. Yet Babylonia does not die. From the ancient city of Isin, a new dynasty emerges, the second dynasty of Isin, its kings clawing back sovereignty over the shattered southern heartland. For a generation, these rulers struggle merely to hold territory, governing a landscape of burned temples and empty divine pedestals. Then, around 1125 before the Common Era, a king ascends whose very name carries the weight of restoration. Nebuchadnezzar I, Nabuchodonosor, Nabu, protect my boundary stone, inherits a kingdom still humiliated, still bereft of its supreme god. His response is a military campaign that Babylonian memory will celebrate for half a millennium. Nebuchadnezzar I marches his army eastward into Elamite territory during the brutal heat of midsummer, a season when armies traditionally remain in garrison. The choice is deliberate. Elamite defenders do not expect an assault through the scorching plains of Khuzestan when temperatures make bronze armor unbearable against skin. The Babylonian forces strike the Ulai River region near Susa, and in a decisive engagement, they shatter Elamite resistance. The statue of Marduk is recovered and begins its journey home. The return procession to Babylon transforms military victory into theological triumph. Marduk has not abandoned his city, he has tested it, and Babylon has proven worthy. Nebuchadnezzar I's victory inscription, preserved on a Kuduru boundary stone, records the campaign with vivid detail. The parched march, the divine favor that turned the tide, the restoration of cosmic order. This is not merely a king boasting. It is a civilization rewriting its relationship with the divine. The theological consequences prove more enduring than the political ones. In the aftermath of Marduk's return, Babylonian scholars compose or finalize the great creation epic, the Enuma Elish, which elevates Marduk definitively above all other gods in the Mesopotamian pantheon. He defeats the primordial chaos dragon Tiamat, fashions the cosmos from her body, and receives the 50 names of supreme divine authority. The epic becomes the liturgical centerpiece of Babylon's Akitu New Year festival, recited annually before the restored statue. Nebuchadnezzar I's kingdom does not long outlast him. By the late 11th century before the Common Era, Babylonia fragments again under pressure from Aramaean tribal incursions sweeping across the western steppe. The second dynasty of Isin fades. But something irreversible has been accomplished. Marduk's supremacy is now doctrine. Babylon's claim as the spiritual center of Mesopotamia is no longer merely political. It is woven into the fabric of creation itself. The statue sits again in the Esagila, lamplight flickering across its gilded surface, and the priests resume their eternal liturgy. Beyond the temples and palaces, Beyond the stele and the statute, life in Babylon unfolds at the pace of water moving through clay channels. The canals are everything. They branch from the Euphrates in a vast arterial network, some wide enough for barges, others narrow enough for a child to leap across, and their maintenance is not merely agricultural labor, but civic obligation. Babylonian law mandates that landowners keep their canal sections clear. Failure to do so, resulting in a neighbor's flooded field, demands full compensation for the ruined crop. Water is wealth, and its management is the foundation upon which every other human activity rests. The agricultural year begins with the autumn ploughing after the river's seasonal flood recedes, leaving behind a thin deposit of fertile silt. Farmers guide wooden ploughs fitted with bronze-tipped shares through the softened earth, often using a cedar plough that drops barley kernels into the furrow simultaneously. Barley is the dominant grain, more salt-tolerant than wheat in these increasingly saline soils, and alongside it grow sesame for oil, onions, garlic, lentils, and the ubiquitous date palm, whose fruit provides sweetness, whose trunk serves as roof beam, and whose fronds weave into baskets and mats. A single date palm can yield 50 kilograms of fruit in a season, and orchards of them line every major canal. Homes cluster along these waterways in neighborhoods of mud-brick courtyard houses. Walls of sun-dried brick, plastered with mud and straw, enclose a central open court where cooking, weaving, and socializing take place. Palm trunk beams support roofs of packed reed and earth. An interior well or a shared canal access point provides water. Families average 5 to 7 members across generations, and household inventories recorded on clay tablets list modest possessions: grinding stones, ceramic storage jars, wool blankets, a few bronze tools, and sometimes small terracotta figurines of protective spirits placed in wall niches. Women hold a legal standing remarkable for the ancient world. Under the provisions of Babylonian law, a woman may own property, conduct business, and initiate divorce if she can demonstrate her husband's neglect. Marriage contracts, pressed into clay and sealed before witnesses, specify the bride's dowry in precise detail. Silver rings weighed in shekels, textiles, furniture, sometimes a slave, and stipulate its return should the marriage dissolve. A Naditu priestess, dedicated to a temple, may engage in commercial lending and real estate transactions, her business archives surviving in the thousands. The shekel, a unit of weight equivalent to roughly 8 grams of silver, governs all exchange. Barley also serves as currency for smaller transactions. A laborer earns approximately 1 shekel of silver per month, or its equivalent in grain. Merchants weigh silver on balance scales using standardized stone weights carved in the shape of sleeping ducks, their mass verified by temple authorities. Beer is the daily drink, brewed from barley bread crumbled into water and left to ferment in large ceramic vessels. Families drink it through long reed straws that filter the grain husks. Ration lists from temple and palace archives confirm that beer constitutes a significant portion of workers' compensation, alongside bread, oil, and wool. Children play with miniature clay chariots, rattles filled with pebbles, and small animal figurines, objects found in excavation layers spanning centuries, their forms barely changing, suggesting a continuity of childhood across the long Babylonian millennium. Potters shape vessels on slow wheels, firing them in updraft kilns that reach temperatures sufficient to harden the clay to a resonant ring. Weavers, predominantly women, work vertical looms producing wool textiles that serve both as clothing and as a primary export commodity. The textile workshops attached to temples employ hundreds, their output recorded on tablets with meticulous detail, weight of raw wool received, number of garments produced, names of workers, days absent. This is the world beneath the grand narrative of kings and conquests, a world measured in canal levels and harvest yields, in shekels weighed and marriage terms negotiated, in bread baked in clay ovens and beer shared through reed straws. It persists through every dynastic change, every foreign conquest, every theological revolution. Empires rise and crumble, but the farmer still opens the sluice gate at dawn, and the date palms still heavy with fruit bend slowly toward the water. But the farmer's world, measured in seasons and shekels, rests upon a quieter revolution, one conducted not in fields, but in small, dim rooms where young hands press sharpened reeds into slabs of wet clay. The Adaba, the tablet house, is where Babylonian civilization reproduces its deepest knowledge. Boys enter as children, spending years copying sign lists, syllabaries, and proverbs until their fingers learn the precise angular motions that transform soft clay into permanent record. Practice tablets survive by the thousands, bearing the hesitant wedge marks of beginners alongside the corrections of masters. A line drawn through an error, the correct sign pressed firmly beside it. These student exercises, mundane as they appear, represent something unprecedented, a systematic institution for transmitting complex knowledge across generations. The curriculum moves from literacy into mathematics, and here Babylon achieves something extraordinary. The number system operates not in base 10 but in base 60, sexagesimal, a choice whose consequences still govern the measurement of time and space. 60 minutes compose an hour. 360 degrees describe a circle. These are not arbitrary conventions, but direct inheritances from Babylonian scribal schools, where students solve problems in land surveying, canal excavation, and commercial exchange using a place-value notation of remarkable sophistication. A tablet now catalogued as YBC 7289, dating to the Old Babylonian period, displays a square with its diagonal and a breathtakingly accurate calculation of the square root of 2, rendered in sexagesimal as 1, 24, 51, 10. The relationship later known as the Pythagorean theorem appears on Babylonian problem tablets a full millennium before Pythagoras draws breath. Mathematical knowledge serves practical ends, calculating the volume of earth to be moved for a canal, dividing an irregular field among heirs, but it also reaches towards the heavens. Babylonian astronomers begin systematic observation astonishingly early. The Venus tablet of Amisaduqa, dating to roughly 1650 before the Common Era, records the rising and setting patterns of Venus over a span of 21 years, constituting the oldest surviving planetary observation text. These are not casual glances at the sky. They are disciplined, repeated measurements recorded in cuneiform with the same precision applied to temple inventories. By the first millennium before the Common Era, Babylonian astronomical practice reaches a level of sophistication unmatched anywhere on Earth. The Emul Apin series, compiled around 1000 before the Common Era, catalogues stars and constellations, records the dates of their heliacal risings, and establishes the paths of the moon and planets through the sky. From this tradition emerges the zodiac, 12 equal divisions of the ecliptic, each spanning 30 degrees, a framework that Greek astronomers will later adopt wholesale. Astronomical diaries, maintained continuously from at least the mid-7th century before the Common Era, record nightly observations of planetary positions, lunar eclipses, weather, river levels, and commodity prices. These diaries, spanning centuries, constitute the longest continuous scientific record in human history. The scribes who maintain these records develop increasingly mathematical methods for predicting celestial events. Lunar eclipse cycles are identified with enough precision to forecast eclipses years in advance. Planetary periods are calculated with errors measured in minutes across spans of decades. This is not astrology in the modern sense, though celestial omens carry profound political and religious significance. It is rigorous empirical science conducted without telescopes, without trigonometry as later Greeks will formalize it, armed only with water clocks for timing, graduated measuring instruments for angles, and the patient accumulation of data on clay tablets stored in temple archives. The knowledge does not remain sealed within Mesopotamia. Greek scholars, Thales, Hipparchus, Ptolemy, will draw directly upon Babylonian astronomical data transmitted through Persian period contacts. The base 60 system embeds itself so deeply in Hellenistic science that it persists through Roman, Islamic, and European traditions into the present day. Every clock face, every navigational chart, every protractor carries within it the intellectual DNA of scribes who sat in mud-brick rooms along the Euphrates, pressing reed into clay, transforming observation into number and number into prediction. The tablets crack and dry in the sun, but the knowledge pressed into them outlasts the city, the empire, and the civilization that created them. The same scribes who press numbers into clay also press stories, and it is through story, not law, not ledger, not astronomical diary, that Babylon most deeply inhabits the human imagination. The literary tradition of Mesopotamia stretches back to Sumerian compositions of the 3rd millennium before the Common Era. But it is in Babylonian hands that these ancient narratives achieve their most enduring form, shaped and reshaped across centuries until they crystallize into works that will outlast every ziggurat ever raised. The figure at the center is Gilgamesh, a king of Uruk, who likely rules around 2700 before the Common Era, remembered in the Sumerian king list as reigning 126 years. 5 separate Sumerian poems celebrate his exploits: his journey to the cedar forest, his encounter with the bull of heaven, his grief for the dead companion Enkidu. These poems circulate independently for centuries, copied in scribal schools from Nippur to Ur. But sometime around 1200 before the Common Era, a scholar-priest named Sinleki Uninni undertakes an extraordinary act of literary architecture. He gathers the scattered traditions, weaves them with newer material, and composes the standard Babylonian version of the epic across 12 tablets of dense cuneiform. The result is not merely a longer poem, but a fundamentally transformed one, a meditation on mortality, friendship, and the limits of human ambition that resonates with a philosophical depth absent from the older Sumerian sources. The epic opens with Gilgamesh as tyrant, his restless energy exhausting the people of Uruk. The gods create Enkidu, a wild man raised among gazelles, to be his equal. Their violent first meeting gives way to profound companionship. Together they slay the guardian Humbabar in the cedar forest and reject the advances of the goddess Ishtar. But when the gods decree Enkidu's death as punishment, Gilgamesh is shattered. He wanders the wilderness seeking immortality, crossing the waters of death to find Utnapishtim, the sole survivor of a great flood. Utnapishtim's account, preserved on the 11th tablet, describes a deluge sent by the gods, a boat built to precise dimensions, animals gathered in pairs, a dove and raven released to find dry land. The parallels with the later biblical narrative of Noah are unmistakable, and when the self-taught Assyriologist George Smith identifies this passage on a broken tablet in the British Museum in 1872, the discovery electrifies the Western world. Yet Gilgamesh is only the summit of a vast literary landscape. The Atrahasis epic, composed in the Old Babylonian period around 1700 before the Common Era, tells the flood story within a broader creation narrative. Humanity fashioned from clay, mixed with the blood of a slain god, created to labor so the gods might rest. The descent of Ishtar recounts the goddess's journey into the underworld, stripped of garments and power at each of 7 gates, a myth encoding seasonal death and renewal. Wisdom literature flourishes alongside narrative. The Ludlul Bel Nemechi, sometimes called the Babylonian Job, follows a righteous sufferer who loses health, wealth, and status, crying out to Marduk for an explanation of undeserved pain. The dialogue of pessimism stages a darkly comic exchange between a master and servant, questioning whether any human action holds meaning. These texts are not entertainment alone. They form the core curriculum of the scribal schools, copied generation after generation as exercises in language and thought. They encode theological doctrine, social values, and collective memory. Lamentations over destroyed cities, Nippur, Eridu, preserve grief as literary form, ensuring that catastrophe is never merely forgotten but transformed into art. Hymns to gods and kings establish the ritual language of worship. Every temple library accumulates these tablets, and the tradition of careful copying means that texts composed in the Old Babylonian period survive into the Neo-Babylonian era and beyond, their language sometimes archaic, their resonance undiminished. What Sinleki Unini understands, and what the entire Babylonian literary tradition embodies, is that clay can carry consciousness across time. Gilgamesh fails to win immortality, the plant of youth is stolen by a serpent, but returns to Uruk and finds solace in the city's great walls, in the endurance of what human hands have built. The irony is precise. The walls of Uruk crumble to dust. The tablets survive. The tablets survive, but so does something else. The impulse that first sent a merchant south along the Euphrates with a bale of wool and brought him home carrying copper. Babylon breathes through trade. Every canal that irrigates a barley field also carries a flat-bottomed boat loaded with sesame oil in sealed clay jars. Every road beaten smooth by donkey caravans connects not merely 2 cities, but 2 economies, 2 sets of needs, 2 worlds of raw material and finished craft. The alluvial plain produces grain, dates, wool, and sesame in abundance, yet it holds almost no stone, no metal, no usable timber. This geological poverty becomes Babylon's commercial engine. The Tamkaru, the merchant, occupies a position of legal privilege and social complexity. Hammurabi's code devotes multiple provisions to his protection and regulation. A Tamkaru who finances a trading expedition enters a formal partnership, the taputum, recorded on a clay tablet sealed before witnesses. Profits and losses are divided according to contract. If a merchant is robbed while traveling, the code requires him to swear an oath before a god, and be released from liability. These are not abstract principles. They are the architecture of trust across vast distances. And the distances are vast. Tin travels overland from sources in what is now Afghanistan, passing through Iranian highland trading posts before reaching Mesopotamian markets, where bronze smiths alloy it with copper. That copper arrives by sea from Magan, the ancient name for coastal Oman, carried on reed-bundled vessels corked with bitumen. Cedarwood descends from the mountains of Lebanon, floated downriver or hauled by ox cart. Lapis lazuli, that deep celestial blue, prized above nearly all other stones, originates in the mines of Badakhshan in distant northeastern Afghanistan, crossing thousands of kilometers before a Babylonian jeweler sets it into a gold pendant. At the commercial colonies, the Karoum settlements established in foreign cities, Babylonian merchants maintain warehouses, negotiate with local rulers, and operate under agreements that blend home law with local custom. Silver functions as the standard of value. Transactions are weighed on balance scales using carved stone duck weights, their smooth forms calibrated to the shekel and the mina. A single mina equals 60 shekels, the sexagesimal system governing commerce as surely as it governs mathematics. Within the city, craft production transforms raw imports into objects of extraordinary refinement. Bronzesmiths work in open-air foundries near the canal banks, casting tools, weapons, and ritual vessels using lost wax techniques. Cylinder seal carvers, among the most skilled artisans in the ancient world, engrave miniature scenes into carnelian, hematite, and lapis lazuli, producing personal signatures rolled across wet clay to authenticate contracts and mark property. Each seal is unique, a tiny cosmos of gods, animals, and geometric borders no larger than a fingertip. Glazing techniques develop across centuries, growing steadily more sophisticated. Potters learn to apply alkaline glazes tinted with copper compounds for turquoise and cobalt minerals for deep blue. These methods, refined generation after generation, eventually produce the breathtaking polychrome tiles of the Ishtar Gate, hundreds of molded brick reliefs depicting striding lions, bulls, and Mushusu dragons in vivid cobalt, gold, and white against deep blue backgrounds. Each brick is individually shaped, glazed, fired, and numbered for precise assembly. The gate represents not a sudden invention, but the culmination of a craft tradition stretching back over 1,000 years. Weavers produce wool textiles that serve as both clothing and currency. Babylonian cloth, dyed with madder root for red and pomegranate rind for yellow, travels outward along the same routes that bring raw materials in. The economy is circular, self-reinforcing, and remarkably resilient. Even during periods of political collapse, the Kasuit transition, the Elamite sack, trade networks bend but rarely break entirely, because the fundamental needs they serve remain constant. The bazaar hums with exchange. Grain measures are standardized. Contracts specify delivery dates, quality grades, penalties for default. Behind every transaction stands a system, legal, mathematical, linguistic, that makes commerce across cultures possible. Babylon does not merely sit at a crossroads. It builds the crossroads, writes the rules for traveling them, and profits from every journey made. But the crossroads that Babylon builds and governs does not belong to Babylon alone. From the north, from the highland heartland of Asher, a power rises that will swallow the ancient city whole, not once, but repeatedly, across 4 centuries of domination, that test whether a civilization can survive the loss of sovereignty itself. The shadow falls gradually. After the brief brilliance of Nebuchadnezzar I's reign, Babylon enters a prolonged twilight. The 11th and 10th centuries before the Common Era bring dynastic instability, Aramaean tribal incursions, and the slow erosion of centralized authority. Meanwhile, Assyria consolidates. Its armies, disciplined and iron-equipped, push southward. By the 9th century, Assyrian kings treat Babylon with a mixture of reverence and menace, acknowledging its cultural supremacy while asserting political control through treaties, puppet rulers, and outright annexation. The decisive turn comes with Tiglath-Pileser III, who seizes the Babylonian throne around 745 before the Common Era and rules both empires simultaneously under separate names: Pulu in Babylon, his Assyrian name in Nineveh. This dual kingship reveals the paradox at the heart of Assyrian domination. Babylon cannot simply be conquered like any provincial city. Its temples hold the gods that legitimize all Mesopotamian kingship. Its scribes preserve the literary and scientific traditions that Assyrian scholars themselves study. To rule the world, one must first be recognized in Babylon. Yet recognition does not prevent violence. When Babylonian factions rebel under Merodach-Baladan, a Chaldean chieftain who twice seizes the throne, Assyrian patience frays. Sennacherib, king of Assyria, besieges Babylon in 689 before the Common Era and commits an act that shocks the ancient world. He orders the city destroyed. Canals are diverted to flood the ruins. Temples collapse into mud. The sacred precinct of Esagila, home of Marduk for over a millennium, is torn apart. Sennacherib carries Babylonian soil to Assyria as a trophy. The destruction haunts even the conquerors. Sennacherib's own assassination in 681 before the Common Era is interpreted by Babylonian chroniclers as divine retribution. His son Esarhaddon, ascending the Assyrian throne, immediately decrees Babylon's reconstruction. Mud brick by mud brick, the temples rise again. Esarhaddon frames the rebuilding as cosmic restoration, claiming Marduk's anger has been appeased. Craftsmen reshape sanctuaries. Priests resume rituals interrupted by war. The city breathes again, but the cycle of rebellion and reprisal continues. Esarhaddon divides his empire between two sons. Ashurbanipal receives Assyria, Shamash-shum-ukin receives Babylon. The arrangement collapses in 652 before the Common Era, when Shamash-shum-ukin revolts against his brother. 4 years of devastating civil war follow. Babylon is besieged again. Famine grips the city. Shamash-shum-ukin perishes in his burning palace in 648 before the Common Era. Ashurbanipal reclaims control and, remarkably, does not destroy the city. Instead, he does something more consequential than any military campaign. Ashurbanipal collects. Scribes are dispatched throughout Babylonia to copy every significant literary, scientific, religious, and divinatory text they can find. These tablets, over 30,000 of them, fill the royal library at Nineveh. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the Enuma Elish, astronomical diaries, mathematical tables, medical compendiums, omen collections. The entire intellectual heritage of Mesopotamia is duplicated and archived. When Nineveh itself falls decades later, these buried tablets preserve knowledge that would otherwise vanish. Through it all, Babylonian priests continue performing the Akitu festival each spring. Scribes continue copying texts. Astronomers continue recording eclipses. The conqueror absorbs the conquered culture so thoroughly that the distinction between Assyrian and Babylonian intellectual life nearly dissolves. Babylon's walls can be breached, its kings deposed, its temples razed and rebuilt. But its knowledge, pressed into clay, fired in kilns, shelved in libraries from Nineveh to Nimrud, proves more durable than any fortification. The shadow of Assyria is deep and long, but beneath it, the light of Babylonian learning never fully extinguishes. And then the shadow lifts. It lifts not gradually, not through slow negotiation or quiet reform, but through fire and iron and the fury of a people who remember what sovereignty tasted like. In the year 626 before the Common Era, a Chaldean chieftain named Nabopolassar seizes the throne of Babylon, and the Assyrian Empire, the colossus that has dominated Mesopotamia for over a century, begins to die. The Babylonian chronicle tablets record these years with rare precision. Nabopolassar's early reign is desperate. Assyrian garrisons still occupy key cities across the south. The new king fights for years simply to secure his own heartland, pushing Assyrian forces from Uruk, from Nippur, from the canal networks that feed the southern plains. Each campaign is recorded on clay, dates, movements, outcomes, in the dispassionate administrative prose that Babylonian scribes have perfected over millennia. But Nabopolassar possesses a strategic mind that matches his ambition. He recognizes that Babylon alone cannot break Assyria. To the east in the Zagros highlands, the Medes under their king Cyaxares have unified into a formidable military power with their own grievances against Nineveh. An alliance forms, sealed, according to tradition, by a dynastic marriage between the two royal houses. The combination is lethal. Assyria, already weakened by civil wars and overstretched borders, now faces coordinated assault from south and east simultaneously. The campaigns of 614 before the Common Era bring the first great blow. The Medes storm the ancient Assyrian religious capital of Ashur, sacking the city where Assyrian kings had been crowned for centuries. The psychological impact reverberates across the empire. 2 years later, in the summer of 612 before the Common Era, the combined Babylonian and Median armies converge on Nineveh itself. The siege is savage. Nineveh's walls stretch nearly 12 kilometers, fortified by towers and moats fed by the Kosa River. But the attackers are relentless. The Babylonian chronicle records that the river itself becomes a weapon. Seasonal flooding breaches a section of the defenses. Through this gap, soldiers pour into the greatest city in the world. The sack of Nineveh lasts weeks. Palaces that housed Ashurbanipal's magnificent library burn. The reliefs depicting Assyrian triumphs crack in the heat. Sin-shar-ishkun, the last Assyrian king to rule from Nineveh, perishes in the destruction, by fire, according to later Greek sources. The fall of Nineveh in August of 612 before the Common Era sends shockwaves across the ancient world. The Hebrew prophet Nahum composes an oracle of exultation. Peoples from Egypt to Elam absorb the news that the empire, which terrorized nations for generations, has been broken. Yet remnants survive. An Assyrian general, Ashurbanipal II, establishes a rump state at Haran in Upper Mesopotamia, supported by Egyptian forces under Pharaoh Necho II, who marches north to prop up the dying empire as a buffer against Babylonian expansion. In 610 before the Common Era, the Babylonians and Medes take Haran. Assyria ceases to exist as a political entity. Nabopolassar, aging and ill, entrusts the western campaigns to his son, Crown Prince Nebuchadnezzar. The young commander proves extraordinary. In the spring of 605 before the Common Era, he leads the Babylonian army to Carchemish on the upper Euphrates, where a combined Egyptian and Assyrian remnant force has fortified the crossing. The battle is decisive. Nebuchadnezzar shatters the Egyptian army, pursues the survivors south through Syria, and establishes Babylonian control over the entire Levant. Then word arrives from Babylon: Nabopolassar is dead, passing on the 8th day of the month of Abu, 605 before the Common Era. Nebuchadnezzar abandons the campaign and races home across the desert, covering the distance in weeks. He reaches Babylon and ascends the throne without opposition, inheriting an empire that stretches from the Persian Gulf to the borders of Egypt. The revolution that began in a besieged southern city 21 years earlier is complete. Babylon rules the world again. And what a world it becomes! The young king who races across the desert to claim his father's throne does not pause to rest. From the first year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar II pours the wealth of empire into a single obsession: the transformation of Babylon into a city worthy of the gods themselves. The scale of the undertaking defies comprehension. Millions upon millions of mud bricks are molded, dried, and fired in kilns along the riverbank. Each one bears a stamped inscription: the king's name, his titles, his dedication to Marduk. These bricks become the signature of an age. Archaeologists would find them scattered across every major structure in the city, a royal mark pressed into the very fabric of the earth. The outer wall comes first. Nebuchadnezzar extends and reinforces the fortifications until they stretch more than 18 kilometers around the city, enclosing both the eastern and western districts, divided by the Euphrates. The wall is not single but double: an inner circuit of mud brick 7 meters thick, an outer circuit of kiln-fired brick nearly 4 meters thick, with a moat fed by river water filling the space beyond. Towers rise at regular intervals. No army on earth possesses siege equipment capable of breaching such defenses. Within these walls, a city of perhaps 200,000 souls breathes and labors and prays. Canals thread through residential quarters in a grid that channels Euphrates water to every district. The river itself is spanned by a bridge resting on boat-shaped stone piers, one of the engineering marvels of the ancient world, connecting the main palace quarter on the east bank to the western neighborhoods. But the glory of Babylon concentrates along a single axis. The processional way runs north to south through the heart of the city, its walls lined with 60 glazed brick lions in brilliant relief, striding figures in white and gold against backgrounds of deep cobalt blue. The technique is extraordinary. Each brick is individually molded, glazed with mineral compounds of copper and cobalt, and fired at precise temperatures to produce colors that blaze even under overcast skies. The lions are sacred to Ishtar, goddess of love and war, and they guard the approach to her gate. The Ishtar Gate itself rises at the northern entrance, a double-arched portal sheathed entirely in glazed bricks of lapis blue. Over 575 relief figures adorn its surface, alternating rows of Mushussu dragons sacred to Marduk and aurochs bulls sacred to Adad, the storm god. The effect is overwhelming. The gate does not merely mark a boundary, it announces that the traveler is entering the domain of heaven on earth. South along the processional way stands the southern palace, Nebuchadnezzar's principal residence, sprawling across 5 vast courtyards. The throne room facade gleams with glazed bricks depicting stylized palm trees, floral borders, and striding lions in yellow, white, and blue against that same unearthly cobalt. Foreign ambassadors approaching the king pass through courtyard after courtyard, each one larger and more imposing, until the sheer architectural weight of Babylonian power becomes a physical sensation. And then, rising above everything, Etemenanki, the house of the foundation of heaven and earth. The great ziggurat of Babylon, sacred to Marduk, stands on a base measuring 91 meters on each side. 7 tiers of mud brick ascend toward a summit temple sheathed in blue-glazed brick, where the god is believed to descend during the New Year festival. The Esagila tablet records its dimensions with the precision of an engineering document. The structure dominates the flat alluvial plain for kilometers in every direction, a mountain built by human hands where no mountains exist. Nebuchadnezzar reigns for 43 years. His building inscriptions speak not of conquest, but of construction. Temples restored, canals dug, walls raised. He rebuilds the Esagila temple at the ziggurat's base, renovates shrines in Borsippa and Sippar and Kish, and maintains the canal network that sustains the agricultural wealth funding everything. The city he creates will endure in human memory long after its mud brick dissolves back into the plain, a name synonymous with splendor itself, whispered across centuries by those who never see its walls, but cannot forget that once, beside a slow brown river, human ambition built something that touched the sky. But ambition that touches the sky also reaches westward, toward the Mediterranean coast, toward the small hill fortress kingdoms that controlled the trade routes linking Egypt to Mesopotamia. Nebuchadnezzar's armies march into the Levant repeatedly during the early decades of his reign, subjugating Tyre, Sidon, and the petty states of the coastal plain. The kingdom of Judah, perched on its limestone ridge around Jerusalem, becomes a vassal. When its king Jehoiakim rebels around 597 before the Common Era, Babylonian forces besiege Jerusalem and carry off the young king Jehoiakim along with thousands of elite craftsmen, priests, and warriors. Cuneiform ration tablets recovered from the vaults beneath Nebuchadnezzar's southern palace record oil, and barley allotments issued to Jehoiakim, king of Judah, administrative receipts confirming biblical narrative with bureaucratic precision. Yet Judah does not learn submission. The puppet king Zedekiah, installed by Babylon, turns to Egypt for alliance. Nebuchadnezzar responds with finality. In 586 before the Common Era, after an 18-month siege that starves the city to desperation, Babylonian soldiers breach Jerusalem's walls. The Temple of Solomon, the sacred heart of Judean worship for nearly 4 centuries, burns. Its bronze pillars, golden vessels, and cedarwood panels are stripped and carried east. The city's remaining population, scribes, priests, nobles, artisans, walks the long road to Babylonia in columns of deportees, leaving behind rubble and ash that modern archaeology confirms in destruction layers of charred stone and arrowheads. Along the canals of southern Babylonia, the exiled Judeans settle in communities whose names survive on cuneiform tablets. The Al-Yahudu archive, discovered in the late 20th century, documents Jewish families buying land, paying taxes, conducting business in Akkadian legal forms while preserving their own names, their own identity. They weep as the psalm remembers, by the rivers of Babylon. But they also write, the exile becomes one of the most creatively productive catastrophes in human history. Prophetic literature, theological reflection, the editing of sacred texts that will become the Hebrew Bible all crystallize in this displacement. Loss becomes scripture. Nebuchadnezzar himself does not witness what his conquest produces in the minds of the conquered. He dies in 562 before the Common Era, after 43 years on the throne, and the dynasty he sustains begins to fracture almost immediately. His son Amel-Marduk reigns barely 2 years before being overthrown by his brother-in-law, Neriglissar, a military commander who rules for 4 years and dies, leaving the throne to his young son, Labashi-Marduk. The boy survives only months before a conspiracy of courtiers murders him and elevates Nabonidus, an elderly official with no direct dynastic claim, to kingship in 556 before the Common Era. 4 kings in 7 years. The pattern is unmistakable: a court riven by faction, a priesthood guarding its prerogatives, a military aristocracy unwilling to accept weakness. The empire Nebuchadnezzar built remains territorially intact, its provinces still sending tribute, its canals still flowing. But the center cannot hold its own succession. The golden city stands, its glazed walls brilliant under the Mesopotamian sun, its ziggurat still soaring above the plain. Yet within the palace corridors, the mechanisms of power that once projected Babylonian strength from the Persian Gulf to the Egyptian frontier now turn inward, consuming the dynasty that created the most splendid metropolis the ancient world has ever known. Nabonidus is not a usurper in the ordinary sense. He is an antiquarian, a man drawn to ancient temples and forgotten gods, and his devotion to Sin, the moon deity of Haran, unsettles the very priesthood that legitimizes Babylonian kingship. The Marduk clergy watch with growing alarm as the new king lavishes attention on lunar shrines while neglecting the Esagila. Then Nabonidus does something no Babylonian king has ever done. He departs. He leaves the capital for the distant Arabian oasis of Tamar, nearly 1,000 kilometers to the southwest, and remains there for 10 years. The Akitu festival, the sacred New Year ceremony in which the king grasps the hands of Marduk's statue to renew his divine mandate, goes uncelebrated. Year after year the ritual stands suspended. In Babylon, the king's son Belshazzar governs as regent, but regency is not kingship, and the theological breach widens into a chasm. The verse account of Nabonidus, composed by hostile priests, preserves the indictment in cuneiform. A king who confused the rites, who fashioned an image no one had seen before, who called it sin. Whether the charges are fair matters less than their consequence. When Cyrus II of Persia, already master of Media, Lydia, and the eastern Iranian plateau, turns his attention toward Mesopotamia, he finds a kingdom whose spiritual center has been hollowed out from within. The Nabonidus Chronicle records the end with chilling brevity. In the month of Tashritu, October of 539 before the Common Era, the Persian general Ugbaru leads troops into Babylon through the riverbed channels. The Euphrates, diverted or lowered, offers passage beneath the city's legendary walls. Resistance is minimal. Nabonidus, who has finally returned from Tamar, flees and is captured. 17 days later, Cyrus himself enters the city. There is no sack, no burning, no mass deportation. The conqueror presents himself not as a foreign destroyer, but as a liberator chosen by Marduk to restore proper worship. The Cyrus cylinder, a barrel-shaped clay document deposited in the foundations of the city wall, declares that Marduk scanned all lands and selected Cyrus to bring justice. The exiled peoples, including the Judean captives carried to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar, receive permission to return to their homelands and rebuild their temples. Babylon itself retains its status as a ceremonial capital. Persian kings take the title King of Babylon alongside their imperial titulature. Darius I constructs a new palace in the city and maintains the canal system. Yet the trajectory bends downward. In 484, before the Common Era, Babylon revolts against Xerxes, who suppresses the rebellion and, according to later sources, damages or destroys portions of the Esagila, and perhaps melts down the golden statue of Marduk. The theological heart of the city suffers a wound from which it never fully recovers. Babylon remains populous, commercially active, administratively significant, but it is no longer sovereign. When Alexander of Macedon enters through the Ishtar Gate in 331 before the Common Era, he encounters a city still grand in scale, its walls and ziggurat still standing. He orders the restoration of Etemenanke and envisions Babylon as the capital of his world empire. Mesopotamian astronomers present him with centuries of celestial records. For a brief season, the old city seems poised for renaissance. Then, on the 10th or 11th of June, 323 before the Common Era, Alexander dies in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar. He is 32 years old. The empire fractures among his generals. Seleucus Nicator, who claims the eastern territories, founds a new capital around 305 before the Common Era. Seleucia on the Tigris, barely 90 kilometers north. The population drains away. Merchants, scribes, priests, they follow opportunity to the new city. Babylon does not fall in a single catastrophe. It empties slowly, like water seeping from a cracked vessel, its mud-brick walls softening under rain and wind, its canals silting without maintenance, its temples growing quiet as the last cuneiform scholars copy their tablets by lamplight in halls that once thundered with festival hymns. By the 1st century before the Common Era, Babylon is a ghost of itself. Parthian horsemen patrol roads that once carried Nebuchadnezzar's armies. The great ziggurat Etemenanke stands as a crumbling stump, its fired brick facing stripped by generations of builders scavenging material for newer settlements. The Esagila temple still receives occasional offerings, but the priesthood dwindles to a handful of aging scholars who maintain rituals in near-empty halls. Rain and wind work patiently at the mud brick, softening walls that once stretched 18 kilometers, dissolving palaces into shapeless mounds. By the 2nd century of the Common Era, the city is effectively abandoned. The Euphrates shifts its course westward, leaving the canal network dry. Sand drifts across the processional way. Babylon becomes a tell, a low, undulating hill of compacted debris rising from the Iraqi plain, indistinguishable to the untrained eye from the flat earth surrounding it. But knowledge does not dissolve with mud brick. Babylonian astronomical records, accumulated across more than 1,000 years of nightly observation, pass into the hands of Greek scholars. Hipparchus of Nicaea, working in the 2nd century before the Common Era, uses Babylonian eclipse data to calculate the precession of the equinoxes. Claudius Ptolemy, writing his Almagest in Alexandria, relies on Babylonian planetary observations stretching back to the reign of Nabonassar. The zodiac, 12 constellations dividing the ecliptic, is a Babylonian invention that Greek, Roman, Arabic, and eventually European astronomers inherit without alteration. The base 60 number system, born in Sumerian temples and perfected in Babylonian scribal schools, persists in every clock face, every degree of arc, every minute and second measured anywhere on Earth. Legal echoes travel equally far. The principle that laws must be publicly written and accessible, that penalties must be proportional, that contracts require witnesses. These Babylonian innovations filter through Mosaic legislation, through Roman jurisprudence, into the foundations of Western legal tradition. Then, rediscovery. In 1811, Claudius James Rich, the British resident in Baghdad, surveys the mounds at Hilla and produces the first modern plan of Babylon's ruins. Decades later, Hormuzd Rassam excavates cylinder inscriptions and cuneiform tablets. But the revelation comes with Robert Koldewey, the German architect who arrives in 1899 and stays for 18 years, methodically uncovering the Ishtar Gate, the processional way, the throne room of Nebuchadnezzar, and the foundations of Etemenanki. His workers extract thousands of glazed bricks, cobalt blue, turquoise, gold, that are shipped to Berlin and reassembled into the towering gate that now stands in the Pergamon Museum, the most visited Babylonian artifact on Earth. The British Museum holds more than 10,000 cuneiform tablets from Babylonian sites. The Iraq Museum in Baghdad preserves countless more, including cylinder seals, Kuduru boundary stones, and astronomical diaries. In 1987, Saddam Hussein controversially rebuilt portions of the ancient walls, stamping new bricks with his own name alongside Nebuchadnezzar's, an act of political appropriation that archaeologists condemned, but that paradoxically drew global attention to the site's fragility. In 2019, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization inscribes Babylon as a World Heritage Site, acknowledging what cuneiform scholars have long understood: that this crumbling tell in central Iraq is one of the most consequential places in human history. Every hour divided into 60 minutes, every circle into 360 degrees, every legal code that insists on written precedent, every story of a great flood, every map of the night sky divided into 12 houses, all carry the fingerprint of a civilization that rose from River Silt, wrote its laws in stone, measured the heavens in clay, and then quietly returned to the earth from which it came. Thank you for journeying through the complete story of Babylon. If this series has brought the ancient world closer, consider subscribing so you never miss a new exploration into the civilizations that shaped our own.